Mhm. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Just realized my camera's not on. There we go. Hello, everybody. My name's Dominique. I'm a safety director with Washington Farm Bureau. And today's Focus Friday, we're going to focus on confined space safety. Um, this is a huge topic that is really hard to pack into 15 minutes. So we're probably going to go pretty quickly, but I am going to attach some documents that you can print out and take with you after this short webinar. So first of all, let's identify a confined space. A lot of times I go to work sites and I start talking about what a confined space is, and they're like, no, we don't have any of those. And then we walk around and I'm like, well, that's a confined space. Technically, that's a confined space. It's a very broad definition. So it's these three things. If it's large enough to enter and do work, if it's not intended for human occupancy, and if it has limited access and egress, it is a confined space. Whether it's permit or not permit required confined space, it is a confined space. We'll get into the rest of that later. So, what I always suggest to people is to walk around with just that definition and start writing down anything that you think meets that definition. So, things like maybe even just trenches over 4 feet deep, mixing boxes, pesticide spray tanks. Doesn't matter if people get in them. If you think that they can't get in them, start writing it down. If the space contains a hazard, now we're going to evaluate. You've written down all of the spaces that meet that general broad definition. If the space contains an additional hazard, then it's considered a permit required confined space, which is has a little different requirement than anything that doesn't meet this definition. So if there's anything that has any actual or potential hazardous atmosphere, which can include enclosed spaces with just decomposing matter. So I've seen confined spaces cited if there is like leaves or something at the bottom of a vault that maybe had some water in it, is now empty. Even if it has an open top, so like a manure pit, maybe that has an open top, um, it has the potential to have a hazardous atmosphere, so it may be a permit required confined space. If it has any loose material that might cause engulfment, if it's configured in a way that can trap people inside, and if there are any other recognized serious hazards, so any electricity, moving parts, anything like that. Now we have permit required confined spaces. It's important to realize that hazardous atmospheres are invisible hazards, and a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they're invisible. So um, we have to evaluate for them. So that's what you see in this picture too. You must do air monitoring to determine if the atmosphere is hazardous, and that might be flammable or explosion over the explosion limit, any flammable dusts, or if the oxygen content is below 19.5% or 23.5%, and then any other hazardous contaminants. And remember, there's a lot of things, forklifts. This is a propane powered man lift and a large tank. Anything that has internal combustion engines, if it's operating inside, you might have a hazardous atmosphere due to the carbon monoxide levels. The carbon monoxide personal exposure limit is 35 parts per million. And I didn't want to go into what a part per million is, but it's not very big. Engulfment hazards. So this fun video is taken while we were down in a training down in Alabama, where they have a lot of engulfment confined space related accidents. And so the Mississippi Farm Bureau has come up with this tank that they pull around and demonstrate how quickly people can become engulfed. And they have a rescue equipment they demonstrate on how to get people out. So he's safe. He's in a harness, and the actual confined space here, the grain bin that we're looking at, is not very deep. But as you can see, even waist deep, he can't get out of this. So engulfment hazards are quick and very serious. Entrapment hazards, if you have anything that looks like this on your work site, you have an entrapment hazard. Anything with a downward sloping floor means that somebody is not going to be able to self-rescue. Other hazards are a little more obvious. If you've got electrical lines, any mechanical hazards like moving parts, and then atmospheric hazards caused by things like welding, painting, anything like that. So if you've identified you've got confined spaces, you've identified there's some other hazards involved within those confined spaces. So now we've got permit required confined spaces. Now we got to talk about what you do as an employer to control those hazards. First of all, you can prevent employee entry. So a lot of times people are like, well, nobody goes in there, and that's fine. That's a great way to control the hazard. But are you sure? Is it maybe once every 5 years somebody needs to go in and change a pump, do a repair? Um, you need to identify the space and ensure that people do not actually enter. And we'll get into a little bit more about what that means. Um, if you are not going to prevent access, or if maybe some employees go in maybe once in a while, then you have to come up with a different plan. You can completely eliminate the hazard before that person enters, so you can, rather than classifying it as a permit required confined space, now it's just a confined space again. But we're going to talk about what completely eliminate means, because just locking out may not be the completely eliminating it. And then if you can't do either of those things, then you have to have a complete written permit system, which is internal. The first thing you have to do once you've identified these confined spaces on your property, you have to make employees aware of them. A lot of times we see people post these warning signs. You also have to restrict access, so that might be a lock or some sort of barrier that takes a special tool to open that space. Um, Lock out all energy sources. Make sure you're actually locking it out at all power sources, bleeding off anything that might be residual energy. So that might be um, water, hydraulic fluid, things like that in lines. Try turning on and off a power switch to make sure all the energy is out. Test the energy sources afterwards. Test the air. If you have a hazardous atmosphere, and let's say you're ventilating like we are here, make sure you're testing the air before, during, after, before anybody gets in there. Locking out moving parts. Make sure that you blank or block any steam pipes and products in feeding pipes, and then de-energize the electrical parts or wiring. If the hazard cannot be completely eliminated, so completely eliminated, that means that you've locked it out, um, and you've bled off any residual energy, and you're monitoring for air, and you're not finding that there is a hazardous atmosphere. Um, if it cannot be completely eliminated, then you have to turn to two two other options. You can either do alternate entry, which is allowed for confined spaces that have only controlled atmosphere hazards, or written permit systems. Now, alternate entry is only if there's an atmospheric hazard, and if no other physical hazards exist, then you may use less restrictive alternative entry procedures. These aren't quite like the permits, You still have to document what you've done, similar to a permit system. They're just not as restrictive. Employees still have to be trained on what a confined space, what the hazard is in the confined space. The atmosphere in the confined space must be tested before and during entry, and continuous ventilation must be used. If a hazardous atmosphere is detected or ventilation stops while somebody is inside the space, they have to promptly exit. And then air monitoring is required whenever there is a possibility of a hazardous atmosphere, because hazardous atmospheres change quickly in a confined space. There are portable gas monitors with alarms that should be used on the person that's actually entering the space. And just remember that different gases have different weights. So there are some that are lighter than air, some that are heavier air. Make sure that when you're doing the air monitoring, you are monitoring at various levels of the space. Now, if you can't do that, you have to have a written permit system. A written permit, that means that you have to have a written permit for each entry for each space. This requires extensive employee training, and there are employees assigned to specific duties. Um, the written permit is going to include describe each individual's role. We're going to talk about each of those roles in the next slide. Describe each individual's roles and responsibility. State the hazards that can be found in that space. Specify the safety equipment that is used, including things like respiratory protection, and then tells how long the job will take, as well as all of these things. The methods used to control the hazard, acceptable entry conditions, necessary equipment, air monitoring test results. That's you're probably going to have multiple places for your air monitoring results because you're going to be monitoring throughout. The name and telephone number of rescue services, which is another big thing when we're talking about permit entry. You have to do training by the employee training has to be done by a well-qualified and knowledgeable trainer. Use professional trainers if needed. The employer must certify that this training has been done and meets the confined space regulation. So it needs to be documented. And the training must establish proficiency, which means that employees need to take some sort of quiz or something afterwards to make sure that they're understanding the material. And then retrain when you have a reason you believe you need it. So if there's something identified in your program that's insufficient or employees are demonstrating insufficient knowledge, you should do some retraining. All right, the roles of the different people involved in permit entry. You've got an entrant. That's the person who actually goes into the confined space. That person needs to know and use equipment properly, needs to know and understand the hazards of the space, is able to communicate with the attendant, knows how to contact the attendant if the area becomes unacceptable, and then exits the space when ordered or when there's an alarm or when there's a dangerous situation noted. The attendant is a person watching the entrant. So that person is on the outside of the space, knows and understands the hazards of the space, knows the behavioral effects from whatever the exposure might be. We're talking probably atmospheric. Knows and tracks who is in the space at all times, warns away any unauthorized person, stays in communication with the entrant, knows how and when to summon the emergency services, and knows how to do non-entry rescues. Um, the supervisor knows the hazards, checks the permits, terminates or cancels the permits once the job is done, and verifies that rescue services are available, and then removes any unauthorized person from the space too. So I know there's three different roles here. This can be covered by two different people. The entrant or the attendant can also be the supervisor, but you need to make sure that they have all of the knowledge that along with that role. Rescue in confined spaces is incredibly dangerous. 60% of all confined space fatalities are the would-be rescuers. Um, Rescuers are often enter confined spaces without thinking about the hazard. You see somebody down, you're immediately going to get in there and try to help that person, especially on a farm. A lot of times it's a family member. Um, and it has to be done with proper equipment. Remember that not all fire departments will have that proper equipment and can do that rescue. So a lot of times people rely on in-house rescue teams. An expensive, this is a serious decision because there's other things that go into in-house emergencies rescue. That includes investing in proper equipment. You have to do training at least once a year. The whole team has to know first aid and CPR, and uh, they need to be available whenever there is an entry. Whenever possible, do non-entry procedures. Try not to train your rescue team to not enter the space, which means that you are going to invest in things like this tripod here. It is usually impossible to pull a person out of a confined space unassisted. So you have things like this that have a retrieval line to a mechanical device or a fixed anchor outside of the space. This should be capable of lifting a person from a 5 foot deep space. Okay, that is the end of my presentation. I am going to go into our chat and attach some um, resources that you can use, that you can take away, because I know that was fast. It's a big topic. It's very dangerous. If you haven't heard, there was recently an incident in Colorado that took 6 people's lives. Um, 3 people were related. It was on a dairy down in Colorado, and that just happened, I think, last month. So it's something that everybody should be taking very seriously. All right, I have attached that. There should be a handful of documents in there that you can take away. Does anybody have any questions? Included in that will be a PDF of these slides too with my notes. I don't see my QA. There it is. All right. I hope that gave everybody enough time to download. Please let us know if you need additional help. Again, professional training. If you are going to do confined space entry at your work site, would be something to consider. Next week, I think we're doing stop duplicating efforts. So we hope to see you guys again next week. Thank you and have a great weekend.